Good morning. Welcome to Unity Longmont Spiritual Center on the 2nd of June, 2024. And I'm Dava Money. I'll be speaking this morning about stories, and Clint and Connie will be providing the music. So again, Clint Brown and Connie Schaefer will start with you.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving light the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you, Clint and Connie. Let us go into prayer together by taking a breath, being fully aware of our bodies, our minds, our precious sacred hearts. Beloved presence, sometimes we pause to really understand what we believe about ourselves, each other, the world, and especially what we believe about divinity and how we experience it. This understanding may be hard to articulate to another. However, we feel it so deeply. We know it so fully. And we express our gratitude. Thank you. And so it is. We will hear from Clint and Connie.
Each science, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless these seeds I sow. Someone warn them from below till the rains come tumbling down. Pulling weeds and picking stones, we are made of dreams and bones. Feel the need to grow my own, 'cause the time is close at hand. Rain for grain, sun and rain, find my way in nature's stream. Tune my body and my brain to the music from the land. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless these seeds I sow. Someone warn them from below till the rains come tumbling down. Plant your rows straight and long, temper them with prayer and song. Mother Earth will make you strong if you give her love and care. Old crow watching hungrily from his perch in yonder tree. In my garden I'm as free as a feather thief up there. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless these seeds I sow. Someone warn them from below till the rains come tumbling down.
Thank you, Clint and Connie. For the very first time, I didn't take that song literally, but heard it metaphysically. It's only taken me a few years. About our own personal transformation and spiritual growth, and how we are fertile ground, and how everything in our universe supports that growth. So, thank you for that enlightenment. So this morning, I'd like to talk about stories and the impact they have on us. And I invite you to be thoughtful about your own story, the stories you've heard, the stories you grew up with, the stories that may be emerging right now within you, because we're on that personal growth journey, aren't we? So I will begin by saying, I can't say this is how it all happened, but I know it's true. So, Palestine. We're going to look at some of the stories of Palestine. And we're going to look at some of the messages and people that emerged from there so long ago. About 4 BC, a child was born, and he grew into an amazing teacher and a prophet. He talked about the coming of the kingdom of heaven, the coming of the kingdom of God. Take a pause now and just ask yourself, what does that mean to you? Because each and every one of us has to interpret the stories we hear. We do that through our own filters, through our own biases, through our own hope. So I invite you to do that as we look at this man, who he became and what impact he had with his stories. So he was a mystic. What's a mystic? It's someone who experiences union with God, no separation at all. And that was the life he led. I have no idea when he first experienced that, but we have the story of his family traveling when he was about 12, and his mother looking around 3 days after they left Jerusalem and going, "Where's my son?" He finally showed up and he said, "Where did you think I would be? I was in my father's house." So we know that his belief went back to that young, and just continued to grow. Another language for mystic is spirit person. And you hear that language a lot in Native communities. And spirit person, again, refers to somebody who is intertwined with the Great Spirit. He was a social prophet. He criticized the elites of his community, of his culture, economically, politically, and religious leaders. He advocated for a completely different social system. I think that's really important about his story. He had a vision of how people could live differently than they currently did. He was also a movement founder. His movement lasted, with him as leader, 1 to 4 years. That was it. Pretty short time. And yet his beliefs, his actions have had profound effect on our world. He engaged in a lot of symbolic actions that demonstrated his beliefs. One of them that we know a lot about is he ate with the untouchables. He ate meals with women. And because women were not to eat meals except with family, those women became known as courtesans. Think about that. The women we know that washed his feet, that ate with him, that tended to him, were known in the community as courtesans. And yet, I think in our hearts, we know they were disciples. They were loving and kind women. He was also a healer. He was a mediator between the divine and other people. Healing energy moved through him and impacted others. He never took credit for that. The credit always went to God. He experienced non-ordinary states of consciousness, directly experienced the sacred. He knew there was more to reality than we see, hear, touch, smell, feel, taste. More to reality. So he had practices that allowed him to shift his consciousness. He used fasting. He used contemplation. He used meditation. He used prayer. Those are the same practices we use. What I'd like to emphasize is that we can all have experiences similar to his if we're open to them. So he taught about ethics. His system of ethics was based on compassion. Think about the word compassion. It means to feel with. So if someone else is experiencing something and we feel it with them, there's no judgment about what they're feeling or how they're feeling it. There's just really cellular understanding of that. And what he taught was that compassion is the central attribute of God. Sometimes in stories, love and compassion are used interchangeably, but he used the word compassion. He was able to read, and he studied. He knew the Hebrew Bible. He knew the Jewish social world and how it was structured. And how it was structured was based on being holy or not holy. So not holy was unclean, impure. Holy was being pure. And everyone in the society, every single person in the society, including the untouchables, knew this. And imagine the pressure one would feel in such a society to follow very rigid rules in order to be pure. Because what did purity get you? It got you a better life. It got you a better position in society. Purportedly, it gets you better wealth, etc. One of the ways that purity showed up as a rule was people were expected to pay a tithing, a tax on agricultural goods. And remember, every society has people in poverty. And so people that could not afford to pay the priests, the temple, that tax, they were automatically impure. Oh, I think about that day after day, year after year, and I want to hunch over with the weight of it. Part of the system that was provided was if you were impure, a sacrifice could be made. So sacrifice was very important in that culture. And sacrifice would, if you were blessed and lucky, bring forgiveness till the next time you sinned. So it was a culture of laws and punishment. Think about for a moment, what would that be like to live in? Where you're needing to think every moment, every day, with every action, am I doing it right? His teaching was that life and culture should not be about purity. It should be about compassion. And that we are all potentially on a journey of personal transformation where we know from within what is right. Completely different ethics than what existed. Completely different. And so that drew the attention of those who were in positions of power. It's like putting a wanted sign over his head. He lived in a country that was destined for war. The country, Palestine, was occupied by Gentiles. Gentiles were some of the most impure people to the Israelis, to the Palestinians. So again, think about how it would impact you if the impure are in charge of your lives. How do you get pure? How do you go from being a sinner to being forgiven? It's onerous. It's so heavy. There were two main groups in that society that were seeking even more purity than the current laws. One was the priestly sect. They had very, very rigid rules. And remember, they were the ones that you brought the sacrifice to, that you brought the tithing to. They were the ones that then gave forgiveness for God to you. And they wanted their very strict rules to be followed by everybody. So they wanted the ethics to be even more challenging. Pretty impossible to be or remain pure. There was another large sect that believed purity can only be achieved in isolation. So a kind of a cult. Go out into the desert, lead a certain life away from the rest of the world. So again, coming back to this teacher, this wisdom teacher, he fought against the purity system. That was his main goal. Get rid of these laws. Get rid of these expectations that are in the way of personal transformational growth. So he taught, his central message was, be compassionate as God is compassionate. I think it's helpful to remember that. He emphasized that ultimately purity is from within. It's not all the outside behaviors, but it's a state of being which each and every person has access to. Each of us has access to that state of being within us, that pure knowing of who we are and the pure relationship we can have with God, with all that is. He taught that God is not somewhere out there, but everywhere, including within each person. Very radical teaching. He fought conventional wisdom. He taught subversive wisdom. What he was teaching was a path of living, a way. He had predecessors before him that taught something similar. Lao Tzu and Buddha. They taught a way of living life that led to freedom, spiritual freedom, and growth. He was a remarkable speaker, an amazing storyteller. He used stories to transform people's perceptions. He was so good at it that he impacted people he met everywhere he went. And his following grew larger and larger. He had what are called the 12 disciples, but there were many more followers than that, including women. He taught that God is generous, gracious, the source of all life, and provides grace. That we can seek grace through our relationship with God rather than sacrifice and punishment. Grace. He taught his followers that their old beliefs would have to die. New beliefs would need to be born, and that would be a personal resurrection. That each person could resurrect on this path. Many of his teachings have been preserved, perhaps some of them in his exact words. And there are a lot of wonderful scholars, especially the last few decades, that can differentiate what was likely real, what might not have been really said by him. And to me, that's fascinating. And one of those documents is the Gospel of Thomas. And the wording in that is sometimes exactly how it is in other writings. Completely different author, completely different place, found in the 1940s with the Dead Sea Scrolls. He knew deeply, intimately, the stories of his tribe. He, like all of them, were immersed in these stories. And there were three primary stories that had themes to them. So I invite you to consider how these stories impacted everyone's identity in that culture, including his own. And these stories are still told today. How might they have impacted you and your identity and your belief of what it means to be human and what our goals are, etc.? So one story is about from 1250 BC, very old story. It is the story of Exodus. It is the story of a people who were in bondage. They were slaves. And then they are liberated. And then they go on a journey of 40 years through wilderness. And then they're moving toward paradise. Paradise was the place of God's presence. What's important to understand is throughout that journey, God was with them. God's always there, right? So this story was known by everyone. It was shared over open fires. It was shared at meals. Remember how few people could read back then. So the power of the verbal story was immense. So again, you're told from early on in childhood that you come from a people that were held in bondage, that were liberated, and then they sought home. Think how important home becomes. The next story, known also by everyone, took place in about 587 BC, so quite a bit later. Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, and some Jewish survivors marched into exile into Babylon as refugees. So the story about your ancestors is that they moved to another place hoping for home, but they were still exiles. How does that impact the identity of this group of people? Always suffering, always needing to move, always seeking home. And this teacher that we're talking about grew up with these stories. In 539 BC, Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the displaced to return to homelands. So again, still that theme of we got to get home. The next story is not an event, but it's a description of the culture that everybody there knew about. And it was an ancient tradition of going way, way, way back, where the emphasis was on a place, the temple. The temple was sacred, it was upheld in esteem. And who? The priesthood. Again, the priesthood were the elite. They were the top of the pyramid of people. And the what is sacrifice. So we go back again to long years of believing people are sinners because they're not pure. Because some of these things you couldn't fight against, some of these rules, etc., not pure. So then you've got to sacrifice with the hope you'll be pure. But there are some impure that could not possibly be made pure. So again, imagine how the stories of slavery, liberation, journey, sin, punishment, maybe forgiveness, influence the identity. And remember, we have heard these stories too. Many of us were raised on these stories. Is there any possibility that they have impacted how you see yourself or how you see others? So the purest were the priests. The next down were people that were Jewish, born Jewish. The next were converts. The next down were tourists, visitors, people who didn't really belong there. We get lower and lower to the untouchables. Who else could not be made pure was anybody with a deformity of their testicles. Who could not be made pure was anybody who didn't have a penis. Now think about that. How many of us here are female? Think about that society where someone is born being told they're impure and they'll never get pure. I have to say, I'm glad to be living in this day and age where there is greater freedom, where we are not driven by purity needs, laws, regulations, and rules. So, again, I invite you to be thoughtful about how did this man so long ago begin to impact beliefs and identity by fighting against the very old ways of understanding humanity and God? How did this mystic, this teacher who taught that God is compassion and that we can be compassion in relationship to God, and that we are not born sinners, and that we do not need to sacrifice goats or anything else to be forgiven. There is not ultimately something to be forgiven for. And knowing that, the freedom that it brings us, he demonstrated ways to have that personal transformation, ways of going and pulling into solitude and praying and meditating and contemplating and studying and interacting with people different from ourselves, lovingly interacting. This man knew not only that his country was heading inevitably for war, within just several years, but that he was going to die. It was inevitable because he was drawing so much attention to himself. And he had been a disciple of his cousin, and his cousin was beheaded very dramatically. So he knew he was going to die. And yet he still pushed on. He still stood up for what he believed. He still impacted people with the stories he told. And then later, the stories others told about him, some of which it's hard to know how much is factual and how much is metaphor. They still impact us. So again, I invite each and every one of us to just consider this teacher, the sage, and especially his wisdom and lessons. And what do they mean to us now? And so it is. And we will hear from Clint and Connie.
So I've been out in the community a bit singing my songs, and it was very nice to think of coming back to this circle again this morning. So for this circle, unity, unity, Sunday, that's the place to be. Joyful spirits, you and me, surrounded by the light. Not much talk of guilt or sin, surely you'll be welcomed in. Greeted by a joyful grin, grounded in the now. Unity, unity, Sunday, that's the place to be. Joyful spirits, you and me, surrounded by the light. Jesus Christ, Muhammad too, Buddha has a special view. Sufi spirit shining through, united in the love. Unity, unity, Sunday, that's the place to be. Joyful spirits, you and me, surrounded by the light. Come on down to unity, it's a great community. Singing helps your soul be free, lightens up the heart. Unity, unity, Sunday, that's the place to be. Joyful spirits, you and me, surrounded by the light again, surrounded by the light, surrounded by the light.
Thank you, Clint and Connie, for performing that song. And thank you, Clint, for writing it. It is such a delightful song and such an accurate portrayal of who we are. Thank you for that. And it's at this time that we go into our donation, our sharing of love and light with the understanding that that's who we are. We are love and light. So let us take a breath and increasingly become aware of that love and that light. That love and that light within each of us and is deeply connected between each of us. And at any time, with a simple choice, we can share this love and light in this moment or any other moment. And as you share, notice how that feels. And we express gratitude for the love and the light that we each are. And so it is. And we will finish with Clint and Connie.
I am the light of the world. That is my only function. That is why I am here. You are the light of the world. That is your only function. That is why you are here. We are the light of the world. That is our only function. That is why we are here.
And that's how it goes. On and on.